listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb, and in this episode of the podcast, we're thinking about a fallacy of the week. We got another interesting one for you. So if you're watching along, I'm going to put that up on the screen here in a minute. If you're just listening, that's okay too. I'll read it out loud. I saw this one posted on social media, like most of them, recently, and thought, wow, there's way more going on there than most of us may realize. So I want to help us see some things here and maybe parse some things out. So I'm going to go ahead and put this meme up on the screen, and then I'll read it. All right, here it comes. The meme says the picture is like, I don't know, some kind of serene beach picture with mountains in the background, and it says in big bold letters, "We will never change the world by going to church, period. We will never change the world by going to church, period." And then the flip says, "We will only change the world by being the church." Okay, we will only change the world by being the church. So here it is as a whole. We will never change the world by going to church. We will only change the world by being the church. Now, that sounds pretty good at first, and numerous people had liked this. We'll never change the world by going to the church. We'll only change the world by being the church. But I can point out at least 10 different fallacies, almost a dozen fallacies going on here. And so I just want to discuss some of those. The first one I want to bring to your mind is what we would call the post hoc fallacy, or another name for that is the false cause fallacy. And so this fallacy, the post hoc or false cause fallacy, that happens when somebody assumes that because one event comes after another, then the first event must have been caused by the second, even when there may have been no direct relationship. So, for example, you've probably heard this before. Oh, I just washed my car and now it's raining. You know, every time I wash my car, it rains. So washing my car must have caused the rain. Right? The statement, we all know that's true. And the statement in this meme implies a sort of causal relationship between going to church and not changing the world, as well as being the church and changing the world, right? So it's suggesting that attending church or attending church services directly prevents world change, while somebody who's off actively engaging in their faith directly leads to world change. And so this is a problem because we know that someone going to church may in fact touch somebody's life and improve the world because of that. They may say a kind word to them or hug them or listen to them or pray for them, and they do a little bit better in the world, right? And just going out and doing acts of service, that may not lead to any world change, right? You may not find anyone to serve, or your service may be rejected. So this is the sort of cause and effect assumption just doesn't hold. It lacks evidence, this false cause fallacy or the post hoc fallacy. Another thing that I see going on here, and I'll just be brief on this, is what we call the ambiguity fallacy. This, by the way, it's ambiguity fallacy. Man, it's in a lot of memes. And as you've heard me say before, this is part of what makes memes funny, this sort of logical breakdown in ambiguousness, just like that's a lot of times what makes jokes funny or helps make jokes funny. So here we have this phrase, quote, being the church, unquote. Well, that's pretty dang ambiguous, right? And that's open to interpretation. What does that even mean, being the church? It's certainly just saying being the church. That doesn't specify what actions or what behaviors or what deeds or what whatever that constitutes being the church. So there's a lack of clarity here. There's a lot of ambiguity, and that ambiguity, right, can lead to a lot of misinterpretation and confusion about what's meant, what's expected, so on and so forth. So we have the post hoc fallacy, the false cause fallacy, and we have the ambiguity fallacy going on here. And you would look at this simple meme and think, well, man, that, it's simple. There isn't that much going on there. But in fact, there is a lot going on here. And I can keep going. There's this, what we would also call an appeal to emotion fallacy. I think part of what that meme is doing, especially with the serene picture, it's black and white, and there's a beach and mountains, and you have these huge bold letters. So the statement is appealing to emotions, both orally or visually and orally, right? Or in writing. So the statement's going to appeal to emotions with the picture and with the words, and it's framing being the church as what's virtuous in the world and what's noble. And it's this noble thing that can change the world. So it's more virtuous than going to church. And so it's going to suggest then that going to church, that's it's like ineffective, it's pointless, useless. You don't really need it, which is absurd. So there's an emotional appeal going on here with both the imagery and the words, and that can influence people. That can play on sentiment rather than logic and rationality, right? So another thing I see going on here is what we would call the cherry picking fallacy. And so what this person is doing is they're emphasizing being the church over going to church. And what's happening there, you got to pay really close attention for this, is that statement is selectively, that is cherry pickingly, highlighting one aspect of religious practice while downplaying another. Right? So that's cherry picking. I'm going to pick the aspect of religious practice that I prefer and elevate it to something virtuous and downplay the other things. So it makes me look like a virtuous person. And this cherry picking approach, what it does ultimately, like, boil down, simplifies what's actually a rather complex religious reality, right? So another thing that I see going on here, fallacy wise, is this is also very common in fallacies, memes like this, the hasty generalization fallacy. It's kind of linked to what we were just talking about, but hasty generalization fallacy at work here is assuming that all religious congregations and all religious individuals share the same level of commitment or engagement or influence on the world, right? And so what it's doing is it's generalizing that merely attending church services has no positive influence, which is not true for all religious communities. And it's generalizing that being the church always has a positive influence. Well, what if you're being church, but you're being a jerk? You're hurting someone, right? We all know that people have done hurtful things and said hurtful things under the banner of church or religion or Christian or whatever. So it's generalizing everybody who goes to church and generalizing everybody who's being the church, doing so rather hastily. You have the false dichotomy fallacy also happening here. And you probably know what that is just by the name. A false dichotomy is going to present a false either or choice, right? As if those are the only two choices, going to church and being the church. And again, this sort of overlaps with some of the stuff I've already talked about. But the truth is, somebody like me, I believe that both attending church and living out my faith as a part of the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the church, they're both important parts of my faith life and my spiritual journey. So it's not an either or in this case. And certainly these aren't the only two options. So I want to point out here, let me just do a couple more here, maybe two or three more, I don't know. And I kind of hit on this maybe a little bit, but there's an oversimplification fallacy happening here. And I just mentioned this, when I was talking about this is a more complex issue than just either or. Um, so what's happening in terms of an oversimplification fallacy here is that, hey, this is the whole church thing, the whole religion thing, faith thing is pretty complex. It's multifaceted, and there's all kinds of ways to do religious practice, not just going to church or being church, right? And so, if we're implying or suggesting that attending church has no impact, for example, on making some change or bringing some positive change to the world, well, that's not true. It's not necessarily true. That could be true, but it's not always true. Churches, for example, often are helping people repent of bad things they've done, helping them uh, lean into virtues, helping them see the value of serving others. So churches in church service actually do a lot of good things, connecting people to God, uh, ordering people's priorities, setting people's worldviews setting people's worldview straight. So all kinds of positive things that going to church does, can result in. So there's this oversimplification. And I would say there's also a theological oversimplification happening here, because from a theological perspective, the meme is oversimplifying the role of worship, for example, or the role of communion or tithing or passing the peace or saying the creed or hearing a sermon or, praying or whatever. It's downplaying and oversimplifying the role of the corporate worship in the religious community, in fostering personal and social transformation, right? A lot of churches teach or should be teaching in such a way that when people attend, it is a source of spiritual growth and community support and results in positive action and living and that sort of thing. So I'll just do two more here. The next one I want to talk about is what we've called the straw man fallacy. And you've heard me talk about this before if you've listened to any of these Fallacy of the Week episodes. The straw man fallacy is where you create a problem that nobody really has. Then you come along and you knock it down. And when you do so, it makes you look like the victor, the good guy. And that's what's happening in this meme. It's implying that attending church is somehow at odds with being an active, compassionate, engaged, connected member of your community, your church community. And so then it's going to set up that negative view and then knock it down and say, no, it's all about being the church. But again, most religious traditions, even outside of Christianity, encourage both worship and social action. It's a both and thing. The final thing that I think I should point out here is the no true Scotsman fallacy. This is kind of a fun one. And I'll explain this. I'll give you an example. If I were to say something like, all cats like fish, and someone comes along and says, well, my cat doesn't like fish. And you say, well, then your cat isn't a real cat. That's called the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? So the idea being that in Scotland, they like this food called haggis. And so it's the idea all Scotsmen like haggis. Well, I know a Scotsman who doesn't like haggis. Well, then he must not be a true Scotsman, right? So basically what's going on there, you got to be kind of like astute to see this, is that what's happening is someone is changing the rules mid-sentence or mid-argument to avoid being wrong. This happens a lot. People do this all the time. And so in this meme, what we see is a view put forth that being the church is the only valid way to change the world, implying that anyone who attends church services but maybe doesn't engage in true social action is not a true believer. Well, that's just not true. What about elderly people who can't get out and do social things? What about young children who attend church but aren't yet able to do that? What about shut-ins? There's all kinds of scenarios where that I could give you to help undermine this idea that or this no true Scotsman fallacy that's at work here. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that I'm seeing when I look at this dumb meme. And yeah, I really do think it's dumb. We'll never change the world by going to church. We'll only change the world by being the church. False. Yeah, not true. This is stupid. Don't buy into this. And as always, when you see memes pop up, try to find the fallacies in them. Try to poke some holes in them because they're there. They're always there. That is the nature of a meme. By default, there's going to be something fallacious, usually. So, again, that's part of what makes jokes work and go, and what makes jokes funny, and that's what makes memes funny. So try to find those fallacies and poke holes in these things. And I'll stop here and say, go to church this week. All right, I hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.